Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Coffee with Legislators this morning. I am Alexis Earhart, proud to serve as your president and CEO of the Danville, Pittsylvania County Chamber of Commerce. We are in a little bit different environment this year. For those who will remember, I think there were a couple dozen of us in the boardroom at the old chamber office last year enjoying coffee, and probably something that wasn't particularly healthy and we were all enjoying as we prepared for the holiday season. Hope you have your coffee or beverage of choice this morning. I think we're in for a really exciting discussion of what's to come in 2021 with so much uncertainty, but knowing that our legislators have such a wonderful hand on the issues and an ear for us. And so looking forward to hearing from them this morning. Before we get started, I'd love to just offer a word of thanks to our innovation partners. For those who are not familiar, our innovation partners are those members of the Chamber who invest in our mission. And it's because of those members. Rachel, your screen has not quite popped up yet. I'm not sure why. There we go. Those members are those who invest in the mission of the Chamber and make events like these possible. And so we are very grateful to the innovation partners that if our Monday morning technology will cooperate, you'll see on your screen here momentarily. We also have a group of media partners that supports us as we're trying to really change the narrative and amplify the positive narrative that's coming out of our community, because we do have so much positive momentum. And I think in any year of all, we've demonstrated it this year. Lastly, I just wanted to say a word about an upcoming event. Next Friday, the 17th, is our Workforce Summit. We have a really exciting program moderated by our own Linda Green from the Southern Virginia Regional Alliance. She will be talking with Mike Grunman and Tim Steller from VEDP about two of their signature programs. We'll hear from Chantel Hullen and Michael Lewis about how they are using those programs practically here in our region. So very excited about that and hope you'll register. With that, I want to jump right in. We're going to give each of our legislators about 8 or 10 minutes to kind of talk about maybe a moment about the special session, but really focusing on what's coming in 2021. And from there, we'll have time for Q&A. So I would encourage you throughout the program to put your questions to me in the chat box, and we will share those as we move into the program. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Delegate Marshall. Delegate Marshall, thank you so much for being here this morning. Danny, we can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Well, sorry, I didn't hit unmute. So thank you. Thank you. I should have gotten used to that by now. So let me, first of all, talk a little bit about where we are today versus when we met last year. So the game has changed since last year when we met. Last year when we met, the House of Delegates had 51 Republicans and 49 Democrats. After the election last year, it's 55 Democrats and 45 Republicans. And we call it the rule of 55. And the rule of 55 means they've got 55 votes, they can do what they want to. And so you have seen that happen back in session, back in also in special session. We were called by the governor for a special session back in August. Usually special session only lasts a couple of days, but this lasted, close to 90 days. And the Senate, I think, got it somewhat right compared to what the House did. The House was on a call like this right here on a Zoom, and there's 100 members in the House. And so to try to get a question asked and answered was a chore. And so you have also seen that going into the 21 session, we're going to be in Zoom again per the Speaker of the House's request. And so the problem we're going to have is that if a bill comes up before us, any bill that there's a lot of bills out there so far, even though we have a minimum of 7 bills times 100 is still a lot of bills. So the issue is that how do we get feedback from the citizens? So what I would encourage you to do that, is to email me or call me. And we have the option of either going to Richmond or either being in our district office here, like myself here in Danville, like where I'm sitting right now. So there's a lot of bills that are, in my opinion, not very friendly to business. And one of them is the legalization of marijuana. If you read the J. Lark report, It is not, I have not seen the bill yet, so we'll have to see what the bill looks like. But if you see what has happened in other states, it has legalized marijuana, and so that will probably pass because there's enough votes to do that. So there's a lot of bills coming that I would encourage all of you in the business world to look at, to make sure that your voices are heard. And please get in touch with me and the other members here, but also get in touch with the folks that on the committees that the bills are related to. Alexis, I'll send you a link to the legislative website. The legislative website is really good in Virginia, in my opinion, because it allows you to see the bills, and you can also see the amendments that are coming up before the bills, so that you can make your voices heard to us here in the General Assembly. So I'll yield my time to Frank Ruff.
I guess he put me on the spot because I had originally agreed to give him half of mine, so we messed up the numbers there already. I think Danny probably it was pretty accurate in the House's description of what the House is doing. I'm not sure he was quite as accurate on the Senate. We did meet in the Science Museum of Virginia, well spaced out, but that was not a very productive way of doing businesses. We were not available except through email or phone calls to talk to constituents and to talk to those who have vested interest in bills. It is hard to get a three-dimensional understanding of something when you're looking at a TV screen or you're talking to somebody over the phone or you're getting an email from them. It works much better if there's interaction where you can sit down and really have a conversation. And that leads us into going into this new session that we're going to start in January. They have decided that we cannot allow any communications in the General Assembly except through the same method. We first thought that constituents and lobbyists would be able to come into the General Assembly building in limited numbers, but they made the decision that only one aide and the legislators would be the only ones in that building. So we will be shuttling back and forth between that building and the Science Museum. Not a good way of doing business, and not a way to really develop relationships that we need to have. The session last year and the special session were really a disaster for most of the interest of this region. One of those was the effort to buy into the Green New Deal. That has cost Pennsylvania, Danville, a loss of $200 million capital that Dominion was planning to spend at Berry Hill. They have changed their perspective. Just a couple of years ago, they were aggressively wanting to be a provider of power to everybody. They have changed perspective now, and they're willing to be a regulated entity again. So they will do whatever anybody suggests and just raise the rates. And that's going to come back and haunt you in your home heating and cooling and everything that you do that requires electricity, because they're just going to pass through any expenses that they incur. The governor has proposed that we go fully into the Green New Deal this January, and that probably will happen. And it's going to affect merchants in Southern Virginia. We have been the beneficiary of having lower gas prices for the last decade, and we've had North Carolina folks coming over. Every time I buy gas in Danville, I see one or two cars getting it from North Carolina there. That equation will change. We will be higher than North Carolina, or certainly a lot closer. And so you might see merchants losing that business, not just the gas business, but also when they don't go in the store and get a drink or something to eat. So that's gonna affect our economy negatively. We spent a lot of time and energy on how we could not defund law enforcement, but how we could defang law enforcement. And that is going to come back and haunt us. Most of us in rural areas, in small towns, in Southern Virginia, have some kind of defense in their home, and they know how to use it. I'm not sure that that's true of the 80-year-old lady in downtown or Richmond, which may well be defenseless, and there may not be law enforcement that's going to be able to go in and protect her. So we're not looking forward to the new session. We're just hoping it's going to be short as possible, and we don't do any more damage than we've already done this year.
Thank you, Senator Ruff, and thank you for being here this morning. We really appreciate it. Delegate Adams, I want to turn it over to you for your thoughts on this. And to our attendees, please keep the questions coming into the chat and we'll make sure those get answered. Delegate Adams, good morning.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Alexis, and thank you to the members of the board for having us here again. And boy, it seems like several years ago when we actually met before the 2020 session, which, you know, a lot of times I'll refer to the regular session of the 2020 session as, well, I remember last year or two, you know, but that was this year. And boy, have things changed. Although we knew, I do recall that meeting. That was one of the more well-attended pre-session meetings that I recall. And the senator and Danny and I discussed the new dynamics and the new majority and how that was going to go. And I recall saying, you know, it would be interesting to see the institutional power of our system, and would the Senate sort of play a moderating force a little bit, even though we had one party governance between the legislative branch and the governor's branch. And I would say that happened a little bit on some of them, from my perspective, some of the more extreme bills we saw get hung up in the Senate. But a lot of bills passed, and you may recall, you know, in our post session discussion, there was, you know, a record number of bills filed, a record number of bills passed, new laws. So a lot of changes that went into effect in July, and it was just being up there was very busy. And then we get back home, and almost immediately, you know, the coronavirus takes hold. And we have the shutdown, which was initially to flatten the curve, as you might recall. And I think one of the first Zoom meetings I actually had was probably that post-legislative session with you guys. And since then, I don't know, maybe had 1,000 Zoom conferences since then. I have been one of the more vocal opponents of the governor's orders. You know, we vest extraordinary emergency powers to the executive branch for impending disasters. It's the emergency and disaster law. But what we've seen in Virginia and other states across the country is the executives using the executive orders to micromanage, to enact policies, essentially, perpetually. Initially, the governor limited his own executive orders to, I think it was June the 12th. And then that, as we approached that day, he made it an indefinite order. So for the special session that we had, I introduced legislation to limit that. And there were a handful of other legislators that had similar legislation, and that was just dealt with as a completely partisan issue, which it really shouldn't be. It's essential to our form of government that the people's representatives are the one making the policy. So I intend to introduce that bill again and keep beating that drum. But in terms of constituent services as a result of the shutdown, I would say, our office just we haven't caught a breath. I know my legislative assistant is on the phone every day with people trying to help them with their unemployment benefits. And you may have seen the news that Virginia is one of the worst states for turning around unemployment benefits in a timely manner, if not the worst. So that has been a real challenge, working with people and connecting them to their respective government agencies that they need. We do that every day, particularly the DMV. That has been a real challenge for folks. So this has been a difficult time on a lot of people. And we're very mindful of that, as we head into session. And you think about the increased cost to people's lives that you heard the senator reference there. I think that's going to be a real concern, something that we're going to have to hopefully adjust to, but I know it's going to be difficult. And in terms of the special session, I think it's important not to forget, what that was supposed to be about. Our special session this past year was to address, additional amendments to the budget. We made those amendments based on the anticipated revenue shortfall at the reconvened session, statutorily defined reconvened session. And that was the first attempt to have a virtual session, by the way. The majority had asked, wanted to do that virtually. The Republican caucus resisted that. And so we had a outdoor socially distanced one-day special reconvened session. But then when the special session was called, by then we had all this turmoil across the country and allegations of police misconduct. And that really took over, at least from the House side of things. And let me just say something. I don't want to get too much in the weeds in terms from a legal perspective, but I have real concerns about the constitutionality of these special sessions on Zoom. When we met for the special session, the House Democrat leadership and the Senate Democrat leadership couldn't agree on a joint procedural resolution. That was the first hang up. And we were both in Richmond. We were at the Siegel Center. The House was at the Siegel Center. The Senate was at the museum. And they couldn't agree on that. And then there was an adjournment to come back virtually. So the first thing was they weren't able to change the rules because they didn't have enough members to do that. So they just passed a resolution granting the speaker the authority to call a virtual session. A way to go around the rules. Now, that hasn't been challenged in court, but it seems clear to me that that's an improper use of the resolution. Then when we came back, the whole point of adjourning is defined in the Constitution, state constitution as well, that it's supposed to be done with the consent of the other body to another place. And if there is to be another place. And of course, we went to 100 different places in the House. And so that's a question that's sort of out there. And it was brought to my attention that the California General Assembly has determined, at least the House in California has determined that it's unconstitutional for them to meet virtually. But we're going ahead with this very loose interpretation of the rules. And so when we came back, there wasn't that much of a protest made about it from our side. We were told we were going to have like a 2-week special session. And of course, it went on and on and on. And I think it was the minority leader in the Senate said, this is just a miserable way to do business. And it really is. And I have to tell you, from my perspective, I was the last remaining Republican on the Crime Commission. And so the special session was basically taken over by not just COVID issues, but by this effort to change our criminal justice system in the Commonwealth. And so that was something that I've fought all along the way. The Crime Commission in the past has served as a bipartisan body that its mission is set out in the code, and that is to address relevant public and current public safety needs and look for ways to fix those. But what's happened is the Crime Commission is now governed by an ideological perspective that says, well, let's use the Crime Commission to put a stamp on our policy position, and then we can come to the floor and say, this is endorsed by the Crime Commission. In the past, I don't recall a time where the Crime Commission has ever produced legislation that it didn't pass. In fact, I don't know that there's ever been a vote against it since I've been in the Assembly over the past 6 or 7 years. Well, that all changed this year because we met virtually for weeks, we being the Crime Commission, and the majority voted to pass out legislation to change what's called earned time credits for inmates who are serving their time. The other thing they did was passed out legislation to allow expungement for basically everybody, felonies, felons, misdemeanors included, that would occur automatically without a petition. That legislation fortunately did not pass, and we were able to stop that in the special session, but I know a version of it's going to come back. It would have been it was called the most progressive in the country. It would have been more liberal than even the most liberal states. But the earned time credits did pass both bodies. That's been signed by the governor. And so what we can say is, and just for those of you who aren't aware of the implications of this, I'm sure you are familiar with Governor Allen's Truth in Sentencing Reform from the 1990s. And that's when Virginia abolished the system of parole and instituted earned time credits. Okay, so we already have those credits, but it allows inmates to have 15% of their time shaved off. And so it's very specific, and over 90% of inmates get that time. And so it works very well. In fact, the only way to measure it is to look at other states. And you see that Virginia is number one in the country in terms of low recidivism. So we have the best system right now. And of course, it's good for victims of crime to know that, that the person who is sentenced is going to serve a majority of that sentence. That has changed now. And there's a complicated tier system that will allow some violent felons up to 50% off of their sentence automatically. Now, that's going to have a ripple effect in several areas. One is on the sentencing. Now, I serve on the Sentencing Commission as well. Virginia has been recognized as having one of the best pre-sentence report programs in the country, and that has allowed criminals across the state to be punished in like manner with like backgrounds. There's a real concern now about how judges are going to, in anticipation that their sentence is not going to be carried out, those judges are going to start imposing more harsh sentences in order to sort of counterbalance that, which will then affect how these guidelines are calculated. Now, yeah, I brought up all these concerns, but we came close, but we were unable to stop that legislation. So I am concerned about that. We're going to see in a year or two, we're going to see the impacts of these policies. We're going to see crime go up, and that's going to be just something we have to deal with. As far as this upcoming session, again, we're back to virtual again. And as I told you, I think these constitutional concerns remain. Whether they'll be addressed, I don't know. There's still discussion about that in terms of a court challenge, but we did enact our constitutional authority to limit the session to 30 days. Now, I know that was objected to by the majority party, but and it'll be interesting to see if that limits the amount of legislation that's introduced this year in light of these challenges that we have. But in terms of how it's going to actually go forward, I think we've already dealt with the budget, which was the primary reason for a short session that comes up in these years. But I'm afraid they're going to come back with bills like the expungement, like some other things that don't necessarily relate to the budget. It's a lot easier for them to sort of pass legislation this way when you can't have members of the public come into the meetings. You can't have the sort of back and forth that you would otherwise have when you're sitting across the table. Of course, we're on a screen now with, I don't know how many people are on this call, but if you can imagine 100 members on the call, that's just going to present its own technical challenges there. So that's enough griping from me about the method of the session and how it's going to go. It will be an unusual time for me as well. I know you're familiar with the constitutional amendment that was recently adopted by the people on Election Day to change the way we draw our maps in Virginia. And that set up a bipartisan commission to do that. So instead of the majority just having, unobjected to power there, we're going to have 2 Republicans from the House, 2 Democrats from the House, and likewise from the Senate, in addition to some citizen members who are going to be tasked with presenting new maps, both at the congressional level and at the State House and Senate. That is dependent on the census data coming in from the federal government, which at this point is anticipated, but there is some risk that because of COVID and all the challenges there, it doesn't come in on time. But I was honored to be selected for that commission as a member here, and certainly think that's something that's good for Southside Virginia. And I'm looking forward to learning more about that and performing my duty there on that commission as well, in between the session and everything else. So that's my spill. Thank you for letting me make it this morning.
Thank you, Delegate Adams. And I think we were pleased too to see you. Some of my colleagues and I across the Commonwealth have been concerned, particularly about rural representation on that redistricting commission. Certainly on the citizen side, we were worried about the legislative side as well. So pleased to see that that you are representing Southside and certainly have an understanding of the law, a great understanding of the law. So pleased to see you there, and happy to have you serve. And we'll look to hear more from you throughout that process. So we appreciate that. Delegate Marshall, we have a question. We have a number of questions that come in, but I want to start with you, following up on your comment about the legalization of marijuana, which we know obviously is going to be a hot topic this session and likely beyond. Can you talk a little bit about how you foresee that having a negative impact on business?
Well, I think the negative impact is that the perception is that that people are going to be able to smoke marijuana and then go to work. I attended a plant tour at I'll use the name Goodyear last year, and so we went through the plant, and then at the end of the tour, the HR person happened to be in the room, and I asked them. I said, "You have plants in states that marijuana is legal now," and I said, "So what is your policy?" And they said the company's policy is just like you cannot show up on Monday morning drunk, you cannot show up. The policy is you cannot have marijuana in your system at the current, now. And so their company policy is you cannot have marijuana in your system. The problem I have with marijuana is if you look at it compared to like alcohol, if someone wants to, have a 6-pack of beer or so, and they get on the highway, the police officer can pull them over, and there is an instant test to see if they are impaired. And as a non-lawyer, impaired is important. The problem with marijuana is if you smoke that joint and you get on the road and you drive, there is no instant test to see if you are impaired. And I've asked this question from all of the advocates for marijuana many times, and I keep getting the response. As of now, there is no instant test. So the problem I have is you as employers, how are you going to manage that? Is that if that person shows up and he has that in their system, and he and then he's involved in an accident. Back in my Marshall Concrete days, that was always my biggest fear, is that one of my concrete trucks hit somebody, and then the lawyer for the other side, gets a test and finds something in that system. And we did drug testing at our work, including me. But how do you get that? That's another issue, I think, that it places on businesses that doesn't need to be placed on businesses. I think that if you had that instant test, it's another conversation. But as of now, I'm a no because of no instant verification to see if you're impaired.
Thank you so much. The next question is about right to work. We all know that each of you fought a great battle for us. Our chamber was actively involved in the coalition to maintain right to work legislation as it stands in the Commonwealth. So the question is, we're hearing it may not be as much of an issue this year, but for any of you, can you talk about what you foresee coming with right to work? Will we see calls for an outright repeal again? Will we see reforms to the legislation? What do you anticipate?
This is Danny. I think that you will probably see another bill come forward again. The problem is they're going to keep trying until they get it passed. We had a constitutional amendment a few years ago that failed. But right to work is important as far as economic development. If you wanted to join the union, you can join the union, but it's not going to be forced unionization. The problem, I think, is it's going to hurt Virginia as far as recruitment of businesses. Virginia has been one of the best places to do business in the U.S., and I think that's just another chipping away of that designation. And I think it's going to hurt our economic development efforts.
I would follow. This is Frank. I would follow up and say that Danny hit it exactly right. It will be introduced, and they will keep trying, whether it's one bite at a time or whether it's the whole apple. We're not sure. But I'd like to go back to the marijuana issue a little bit. From the business perspective, drug dealers are in the business of making money. And if you say that the state's going to take over the sale and operation of marijuana sales to adults for the purpose of the tax incentive that they would get out of it, then that's going to drive the drug dealers to focus more on those under 18. And so I'm very concerned about our children and how this will affect them. I think there are a lot of other problems with it, but that is the greatest problem. We already have enough drugs out there. And if it's not to the children, then they will get harder drugs to sell, and you'll have more fentanyl deaths, as you've seen in Danville already.
Thank you. I'd like to ask another labor question. We talked a little bit about right to work, but we saw lots in that space in the 2020 session, many of which were passed, including an increase to the minimum wage on an incremental basis. Of course, we would advocate for a regional approach to that, knowing that cost of living in South Hill is quite different than Fairfax. But the question I would have from the group is, is there thought this session about, in light of the pandemic, kind of extending some of the legislation that was passed last year, using minimum wage even as an example?
So I have already sent in a bill to Legislative Services to do just that, and it would postpone the minimum wage increase until July 1 of 2022. In the real world, if you look at, you go anywhere in the city of Danville, Pittsylvania County, or anywhere you drive, there's help wanted signs. And so if you are looking for a job, you can find a job. Right now, I know that there are some people who are hurting. My daughter's a travel agent. She has not had a very busy year this year, trying to book trips, et cetera. And so there are some, certainly some losers, but there's a lot more winners. The economy is doing okay for a lot of companies. But I think that moving forward, as far as what you mentioned, Alexis, is about a regional approach. We tried that many times on the House side and also on the Senate side as far as a regional approach. If you look at the average prevailing wage in Danville, which is in the mid-30s, then you go to Northern Virginia and you look at Loudoun County, the average wage in Loudoun County is above $100,000. So $15 minimum wage in Loudoun County is not a hit on the small businesses as it is here. So we made that point to the patron of the bill but it kind of fell on deaf ears.
I don't want anybody to think that we don't support workers making as much money as possible. But they have to be of value to a business, and the business needs to make the decision, not the government. And if we can, I would like to see everybody make at least $100 an hour. But the reality is, if they can't produce that for the business doesn't survive and they don't have a job.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Delegate Adams, maybe we'll start with you on the next question. Across the Commonwealth this year, we've seen several local county governments pass sanctuary city resolutions to defy policies from Richmond. Do you foresee any legislation coming to penalize those localities for those actions?
Well, it's interesting that that's mentioned. Our neighbor to the west, Delegate Poindexter, actually had legislation a couple years ago to prohibit localities from instituting a sanctuary city. And I don't believe that passed. And as I recall, the argument against it at the time was, well, that's not allowed anyway. That's not something that, Virginia is a what's called a Dillon rule state, which means that the localities don't exercise any degree of sovereignty. And so they're only allowed to pass ordinances and enact laws that are consistent with what is established from the state government. But of course, we've seen, there's always moves to go against that. And the question is, well, what can you do? I don't foresee the current administration, frankly, taking any action. I mean, it is an executive function to enforce the state laws, and there's certainly not going to be any additional penalties passed by this current majority. No, I guess the short answer is no. I don't see that happening. I would like to see executive action where those localities defy state law, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen in this climate. Maybe down the road, we'll see.
Thank you. Next question is about the tax code. So for any of you, has the legislature considered or passed an update to the Virginia tax code due to the significant changes in the IRC from the CARES Act?
There have been no changes, and all the money went to the governors of the states to decide how to spend. We got a little bit of that to do some projects in the Senate, in the Senate's budget, and the House went along with that. But for the most part, that's controlled by the governor, and the governor is focused on raising as much money as possible. So I don't see any change based on that factor alone.
Senator Ruff, I want to stay with you for the next question. It's directed to you. Can you talk more specifically about what you foresee the Democrats planning to do this session regarding funding for police?
I don't think funding is going to be the issue. I think that they got just about everything they wanted this last session, this special session. Most of that will kick in the next couple of months. There probably will be a few outlier things, but for the most part, I think they're going to be kind of in the trench where they want to be. And I don't think they'll go much farther out on that level. I think you'll see some action on trying to have some more effect on the Second Amendment rights. And they may try again with the qualified immunity with law enforcement officers, but I don't think it's going to be a financial issue. The reality is right now, we're short state troopers. They have been resigning in mass or retiring in mass. If that qualified immunity had not been killed by the Senate, I have a group of relatively younger troopers that were all going to resign in mass if that passed. So we can't train them as fast as they're leaving. So that's going to be the greater issue. It's probably the same is true with local law enforcement also. Is it? I know of one case out of Danville where an officer could not do what he wanted to do, so he just walked away.
Alexis, let me add to that. There were two bills in special session that were not heard. There were a lot of bills that were not heard just because of the volume of bills. And I think that those bills are going to come back to regular session in January. The first bill was to defund the Virginia State Police by 25%, and the other one was to defund city police, like the city of Danville, by 25%. Now, if you break that down to dollars and cents, if that bill would have passed, that bill becomes law, it would cut the city's budget from money. It's called the 599 money, by $701,000. So that's a big hit. And so how would that be made up? Would they be cut, or would the taxes in the city was raised? Now, both of those bills were put in by Delegate Lee Carter, a Bernie Sanders socialist from up in, who's running for governor, is on the Democratic side, and he's from up in Manassas. Now, a very smart young man, but his thoughts and my thoughts do not go down the same path. And so hopefully the bill will not be brought up. It will probably be introduced, but hopefully it will certainly not go forward. But that's kind of what we're dealing with out there now.
Thank you. I'd love to touch on broadband. We had a question here about kind of progress, and we've heard it locally. We know it's going to take public and private support. We know it's going to take federal support. The governor has called for us to be fully online by 2028. The broadband advisor has said, no, it's going to be 2025. How do you all see us getting there as a Commonwealth?
Back in January and February, when we were in session, the state of Virginia was flush with cash. It was good. It was good times. I mean, how far that pendulum has swung from one to the other. And the second part of it was that we passed a bill, as we all know, about the casinos. Well, there's going to be, at that time when that bill was introduced, there's going to be a revenue source for the state of Virginia. So I suggested to the governor that new funding go to the deployment of broadband. He didn't think that was a good idea, so he didn't do that. So my second thought is that if I think marijuana legalization is going to pass, they got enough votes to pass it. Well, that's going to be reportedly a revenue source there. So that new revenue source could go for deployment of broadband. You're going to have a revenue source to get this moving. It's as we all saw this past year in rural Virginia when K through 12 is on virtual sessions. You got winners and losers again. You got, even people living in the city of Danville don't have access to broadband. Especially it gets even worse in rural Virginia, like Pennsylvania County. But if you get out to Southwest Virginia, out in the mountains and whatnot, you're not going to get fiber to the house. It's going to be it's going to have to be a wireless type of situation. So, but it's going to be costly. But it's not only good for the K through 12, but it's also good for businesses. It would be a way that someone who wants to be in the IT business does not necessarily have to live in a metropolitan area. They could live in rural Virginia if they have access to broadband.
And Alexis, if I could just jump in
Please.
real quick, and I'm going to have to end on this. Unfortunately, I have to run across the street, and it does look like there's some snowflakes coming down through the window here in Chatham. But I've got a court hearing in just a couple of minutes. But I would just like to say about broadband is, I think the good news is I don't ever hear anyone suggest, when all the different approaches are looked at and we're coming up with ways to make it happen, no one's saying it shouldn't be a priority. I mean, I think that's something good. You know, I serve on the rural center, and that's one issue I think we have seen really bipartisan support. Legislation that Danny was instrumental in a few years ago with the utility companies. I think we're going to really start seeing some progress there, where they're able to use their infrastructure to reach folks. So I think that's something that there could be some good news in the days ahead. It's certainly necessary for all the reasons you heard Delegate Marshall express. But anyway, if I could make an exit, I just want to thank you again for this opportunity and look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you. And thank you for your service to the Commonwealth, Delegate. We appreciate you so much. So Delegate Marshall, Senator Ruff, we have one or two more before we end this morning. Can you talk a little bit about access? I mean, we heard about the session is going to be complicated with the mix of virtual face-to-face, but even face-to-face, you know, lobbyists not being permitted to engage with the Senate in that way. So we know it's going to be a challenge for our lobbyists in Richmond. I'm thinking about our business community here. Clearly, we see ourselves as the voice of businesses, the chamber, and can be in constant contact with you. What's the best way for us to engage this session, as we know it's going to be particularly challenging in terms of the format?
For me, the best solution would be email me what the subject is and tell me when you're available so that we can talk not face to face, but at least in the conversation. Yep. With a human rather than a machine.
Yeah, great.
I would concur also. I would suggest that you contact either me by the delegate email or either to call the Danville office, which is 434-797-5861. And so if our voicemail here gets overloaded, please call back, because we'll be cleaning it out every day. But we will be in session just like I am right now, probably sitting in front of a computer screen. So I'm not sure. I think Frank, the Senate's actually going to go back to Richmond. We're not. But I want to get your input on the number of bills that relate to what is important to you.
We will, in our follow-up for our attendees today, but also during the session, we'll be sure to share that contact information. And Danny, we'll share that LIS system as well so that people can follow the legislation that's of interest to them. We're also big fans of the Virginia Chamber's bills we're watching. You all more often than not align as
So here's an example in point. You know, when we're trying to have a virtual meeting in Richmond, something exactly like this happens, or people get dropped, or either somebody is making a point and all of a sudden they just vanish, and so I don't know how in the world we're going to do the people's business. It was bad enough in a short session, but it's even worse when we go to January. And Alexis and I did not set this up. This just happened.
And I didn't realize I froze. I mean, you missed me going on and on about you and Senator Ruff and how you're always pro-business. I mean, you really missed that. So I'll have to put that in an email to you all. We do have one more question this morning. Of course, we wanted to touch on the pandemic. You probably are aware that the city, the county, Danville Regional Foundation, the health department, and the chamber back in the spring put together the Standing Together 6 Feet Apart campaign. And while there's been much discussion about whether I should have to do these things or not do these things, I think we would all agree that we want the pandemic we want to stop the spread. We want to slow the pandemic for the sake of economic recovery throughout the Commonwealth. So what can we do, not necessarily we know what we need to do from a public health perspective, but we're seeing now predictions that we will not recover in rural areas until 2025. What can we do as a business community to help accelerate that recovery? How can we support you, and what can we do in the private sector?
That is a question that would be impossible to answer, I'm afraid, because nobody knows where it's going. Interestingly, there was a presentation last week that showed where the most businesses closings were. And percentage-wise, Northern Virginia and Tidewater were the hardest hit. The best area was our area. Now, I'm not sure why, but I think it's because we're used to being broke. So we don't have the highs that they have, and we don't have the expectations sometimes that they have. So I think that's there. I want to take back to the issue of helping getting information, and be very careful when you're listening to the news media. In the beginning of the special session, the Democrats worked very, very closely with the chiefs of police and the Sheriff's Association to come up with workable law enforcement legislation, not necessarily anything they wanted, but that they could accept. After the Zoom meetings with the committee and them were over, at the beginning of a meeting to vote on it, they substituted where they started out, which was pretty much where the House was. And the Sheriff's Association, the State Police, the Police Chiefs Association, all were blindsided. So be very careful that you're watching what's happening. It was a great sleight of hand, but it's not good government.
So Alexis, back to the COVID. My wife and I had this discussion back early last summer. Is that first of all, let me lighten the mood a little bit. I had a call from our grandson, who is 18, and he says, "Nana Kay, I'm worried about you and Dan as far as the COVID. If I look at the information, it affects the elderly. And so I'm worried about you too." And so I didn't consider myself that elderly, but if you're 18, you do. But back early last summer, I didn't know anyone who had tested positive. I'm looking at someone here now who has tested positive, and this stuff is real. And so we have got to be careful out there. I've been tested twice. Luckily, I've been tested negative both times. But that's one of the things I suggested to the Speaker of the House. There's an instant test. I had an instant test done, and I had the test done at the health department. It takes a couple of days to return. The vaccine's supposed to be coming out any day now. At least is what we hear on national news. I'm sure Frank has gotten this email and calls also. I've gotten probably half a dozen or a dozen of them saying, do not require us do not mandate us to take this vaccine. And so that will probably be, I don't know if that's going to be a bill coming forward, but you're going to need to weigh in on that one also, as far as, do we require this to happen? Which I think would probably be a bad idea. So there's going to be some bills about the COVID vaccine and others that's coming forward too.
Yes. Thank you for that. And I can attest to Delegate Marshall's care in this matter. When he sees me on the street, he crosses the street, and I'm sure it's because of COVID, no other reason that he would want to not walk right next to me. No, but I appreciate you both, Delegate Marshall, Senator Ruff, for being here this morning. I think this has been a really informative conversation, and I would encourage those on the call, if there are particular legislative issues they're interested in or concerned about, to reach out to me. This session, we will be in contact with you. You have our legislative agenda. It's on our website. We are advocating for each of the businesses in this community. 60% of our members have fewer than 25 employees. And I know that small business is in your heart, Delegate Marshall and Senator Ruff as well. So with that, I want to thank each of you for being here this morning. Any last word?
I would like to throw in one last word, and that is that our children and our schools and our education system are being challenged. As an example, our men's Bible study yesterday morning, one of their grandsons who lives in the Raleigh area was a straight A student. His first report this fall was he was failing everything. He was simply not doing the work because there's not the motivation. I would encourage the chamber and businesses to help adopt students, to mentor them, to say, this is important. So you need to, the parents are being challenged right now. Some of them, it's beyond their ability to work with the young people. And some of them, they're working, both parents are working and they're not aware of what's happening virtually. So I think it's extremely important that we get as many mentors out there as we can right now.
Support that. Thank you for those comments. Thank you so much. We appreciate you both and wish you the best through the holidays and with this session, and know that we will be in touch as issues come forward. For those on the call, thank you so much for being here this morning, for your active engagement, and we look forward to working with you. All the best to everyone. Stay safe and healthy, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.